The invitation arrived like a slap, glossy and smug, tucked into an envelope that reeked of his ex's cologne. Julian Carter, 28, stared at the embossed card, its gold script announcing Elliot Marshall's grand engagement party at the Pinnacle, Seattle's swankiest rooftop venue. He hadn't spoken to Elliot in 3 years, not since their breakup left Julian gutted. Yet here was proof his ex still knew how to twist the knife. Julian tossed the card onto his cluttered desk, where sketches for wedding venues and mood boards for corporate galas spilled over in organized chaos. His Capitol Hill apartment doubled as his office, a testament to his grind as an event planner. He was good, no, great, at his job, turning dreams into reality with a meticulous eye and a heart that still believed in love, despite everything. But to Elliot and his elite circle, Julian was just the gay planner, a punchline to their champagne-fueled laughter. He should have burned the invite. Instead, he RSVP'd. The Pinnacle's rooftop glowed under a September sunset, fairy lights weaving through lush greenery, casting a warm haze over Seattle's skyline. Julian adjusted his navy blazer, his curly brown hair catching the breeze as he stepped into the party. The crowd was a who's who of the city's tech moguls and socialites, all here to fawn over Elliot and his fiancée, Claire Wentworth, heiress to a shipping empire. Julian's stomach churned, but he held his head high, weaving through guests who barely registered his presence. "Julian, you actually showed." Elliot's voice cut through the chatter, smooth and sharp as ever. He stood by the bar, his blonde hair swept back, his tailored suit screaming money. Claire clung to his arm, her diamond ring glinting like a warning. "Didn't think you'd crawl out of your little planner cave." The crowd nearby snickered, and Julian's jaw tightened. "Wouldn't miss it," he said, voice steady, though his heart raced. "Congrats, by the way." Elliot smirked. "Thanks. Stick to stringing fairy lights, yeah? Leave the big leagues to us." Julian forced a smile, his fingers curling into fists. He'd spent years building his business, Carter Events, from nothing, clawing his way up in a city that chewed up dreamers. Yet here, among Elliot's crowd, he was reduced to a stereotype. The gay planner, the nobody. He grabbed a glass of wine and retreated to a quieter corner, where the city's lights stretched below like a promise he hadn't yet claimed. That's when he saw him, Ethan Navarro, 29, leaning against a railing, his tousled black hair falling into green eyes that held a quiet intensity. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and a half-smile that felt like an invitation. "Rough night?" Ethan asked, his voice low, warm. Julian chuckled, bitterness creeping in. "You could say that. Ex's engagement party. Not exactly my scene." Ethan tilted his head, studying him. "Yet you're here. That's either brave or masochistic." "Bit of both," Julian admitted, sipping his wine. "I'm Julian. Ethan." He extended a hand, his grip firm, lingering just a second too long. "I'm crashing, technically. Friend of a friend. You? Invited, unfortunately." Julian glanced at the crowd, where Elliot was holding court. "I planned events for half these people. They still look through me." Ethan's eyes softened. "Their loss. You don't strike me as someone who fades into the background." The words hit harder than Julian expected, stirring something he hadn't felt in years. They talked, the party fading into a hum as Ethan shared stories of his work as a freelance photographer, capturing raw, unfiltered moments. Weddings, protests, quiet mornings in dive bars. His passion mirrored Julian's, and for the first time that night, Julian felt seen. By midnight, the party was a blur of clinking glasses and fake laughter. Julian and Ethan had claimed a corner of the garden, trading stories under the stars. Ethan's laugh was unguarded, his gaze steady, and Julian found himself leaning closer, their hands brushing as they reached for the same bottle of wine. You ever think about getting out of this city? Ethan asked, his voice soft but probing. Starting fresh somewhere new? Julian hesitated. Seattle was his battleground, where he'd built his name despite the whispers and the setbacks. Sometimes, but I've got too much to prove here. Ethan nodded, like he understood the weight of unfinished fights. I get it. I've been running from my own ghosts. Grew up in a small town. Got outed at 16. Took years to stop looking over my shoulder. Julian's chest tightened. He knew that story too well. The fear, the shame, the fight to reclaim yourself. How'd you do it? Move on. Found people who saw me, not just the label. Ethan's eyes locked on his, and for a moment, the world stilled. Then Elliot's voice shattered it. Well, isn't this cozy? He sauntered over, Claire trailing behind, her smile dripping with pity. Julian still working the help angle. Huh? Who's your friend? Ethan stiffened but didn't back down. Ethan Navarro. And you are? Elliot's grin faltered, and used to being challenged. Elliot Marshall. This is my party. Nice lights, Ethan said, nodding at the fairy lights Julian had likely designed. Bet they took someone with vision to pull off. Julian bit back a smile as Elliot's face twitched. Yeah, well, enjoy the free booze, Elliot muttered, steering Claire away. Asshole? Ethan said under his breath, and Julian laughed, the sound surprising even himself. The night stretched on, and Julian found himself stealing glances at Ethan, his heart doing things he hadn't let it do since Elliot. But the party wasn't done with him yet. Claire cornered him near the dessert table, her voice low and syrupy. Julian, you're so resilient, she said, like it was a compliment. Planning events must be so quaint. Do you ever get tired of being the help? Her words stung, but Julian kept his cool. I love what I do. Not everyone needs a trust fund to feel relevant. Claire's smile froze, and she walked away, leaving Julian simmering. He was tired of the jabs, the dismissals, the way this world reduced him to a caricature. But he wasn't done fighting. Ethan appeared at his side, his presence grounding. You okay? Julian nodded, though his hands shook. Just need a minute. They slipped away to a quieter part of the rooftop, where a wooden signpost stood, carved with the words, Love rewrites every story. Julian traced the letters, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to believe that. Ethan stepped closer, his breath warm against Julian's cheek. You should. You're writing yours right now. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Julian forgot the party, the pain, the past. He leaned in, and so did Ethan, their lips brushing in a kiss that felt like defiance, like hope. The world didn't stop, but it shifted just a little. By the time Julian left the pinnacle, his heart was a mess of nerves and possibility. Ethan had slipped him his number, promising coffee the next day. But as Julian walked through Seattle's rain-slick streets, Elliot's mockery echoed in his mind. Just the gay planner. The words burned, fueling a fire Julian hadn't known he still carried. He didn't just want to prove them wrong. He wanted to own the game. And the pinnacle, with its glittering views and smug exclusivity, was the perfect place to start. Julian's apartment was a war room by morning, papers strewn across every surface, his laptop glowing with spreadsheets and emails. The idea had taken root the moment he left the pinnacle, by the venue. It was audacious, borderline insane, but Julian was done playing small. If Elliot and his crowd thought they could keep him in a box, he'd burn the damn box down. He sipped his coffee, the memory of Ethan's kiss lingering like a spark. Their coffee date was set for noon at a quirky cafe in Fremont, but Julian's mind was already racing toward his plan. The pinnacle was owned by a struggling real estate group, its value tied to its prestige more than its profits. Julian had planned enough events there to know its weaknesses. Overpriced rentals, outdated systems, a management team coasting on reputation. He could turn it around. He would. His phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Still thinking about last night. See you soon. Julian smiled, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about building something undeniable, something that screamed his worth to a world that refused to see it. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries, its walls lined with mismatched art. Ethan was already there, his green eyes catching the light as he waved Julian over. They settled into a corner booth, and for an hour, the world was just them. Two men trading stories, laughing over shared quirks, like their mutual hatred of overpriced kale smoothies. "You're different today," Ethan said, stirring his latte. "Like you're carrying a secret." Julian leaned back, debating how much to share. "I'm thinking of doing something big. Really big." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Spill." "I want to buy the Pinnacle." The words felt wild, almost reckless, but saying them out loud made them real. "Turn it into something better. Something mine." Ethan whistled low. "That's not just big. That's seismic. You got the capital for that?" "Not yet," Julian admitted. "But I've got connections, clients who trust me. I've been saving, and I know the venue's weak spots. It's a long shot, but I'm tired of being the guy they laugh at." Ethan's gaze softened, but there was a fire in it too. "You're not that guy. You're the one who makes their parties unforgettable. They're just too shallow to see it." Julian's chest warmed, but doubt crept in. "It's risky. If I fail, I lose everything." "Then don't fail," Ethan said simply, his hand brushing Julian's across the table. "I'll help. I'm not just a photographer. I've got a knack for marketing. You need a pitch to investors? I'll make it look like a damn masterpiece." Julian laughed, the weight lifting just a fraction. "You're trouble, Navarro." "The good kind," Ethan shot back, grinning. The next weeks were a blur. Julian worked late into the night, crunching numbers, meeting with bankers, and pitching to investors he'd impressed over years of flawless events. Ethan was true to his word, crafting visuals that made Julian's vision for the Pinnacle, a modern, inclusive event space for all of Seattle, come alive. They spent evenings together, poring over plans, their chemistry growing with every shared dream. But the whispers followed Julian everywhere. At a client meeting in Belltown, he overheard a guest from Elliot's party. "That's the planner guy, right? Cute, but delusional if he thinks he's more than hired help." Julian's smile didn't waver, but the words cut deep. He channeled the pain into his work, each rejection fueling his fire. One night, over takeout in Julian's apartment, Ethan caught him staring at a financial projection, his face tight with worry. "You're gonna burn out," Ethan said, setting the food aside and pulling Julian onto the couch. "Talk to me." Julian sighed, running a hand through his curls. "What if they're right? What if I'm just chasing a fantasy?" Ethan cupped his face, his touch steady. "You're not. You're building something real. And I'm here. Okay? We're in this together." Their kiss was slow, deliberate, a promise sealed in the quiet of the night. Julian felt the world shift again, not just toward his goal, but toward Ethan, who saw him in ways no one else ever had. The breakthrough came in late October. A tech investor, Priya Sharma, 42, who'd hired Julian for her company's gala, called him in for a meeting. Her office overlooked Puget Sound, all glass and steel, and she didn't waste time. "I've seen your work, Julian," Priya said, her voice crisp. "You're meticulous, creative, and you've got grit. This Pinnacle idea, it's bold. I'm in for 40% of the capital, but I want a detailed plan by next week." Julian's heart pounded. "You won't regret this, Priya." "I don't do regrets," she said, smiling faintly. Just don't let those vultures at the top scare you off. They thrive on keeping people like you down. He left her office on a high, texting Ethan immediately, "We got a major investor. Drinks tonight?" Ethan's reply was instant. "Hell yes. Proud of you." That night, they celebrated at a dive bar in Pioneer Square, the kind of place where no one cared who you were or who you loved. Ethan raised his glass, his eyes gleaming. To rewriting the story. Julian clinked his glass, his heart full. To us. But as they laughed and danced to a jukebox playing old soul tunes, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. Elliot's crowd wouldn't let him rise without a battle, and the pinnacle was still out of reach. For now. The plan was coming together, but the pressure was crushing. Julian juggled meetings with investors, late-night revisions to his business proposal, and the growing demands of Carter events, which still paid his bills. Ethan was his anchor, showing up with coffee and quiet encouragement, his camera always ready to capture the moments Julian forgot to savor. But the closer Julian got to his goal, the louder the doubts grew. Not just his own, but those of the city's elite, who caught wind of his ambition. At a networking event in downtown Seattle, Julian pitched his vision to a room of skeptical investors. He wore his best suit, his voice steady as he outlined his plan to transform the pinnacle into a cultural hub. Accessible, innovative, a space where everyone belonged. Halfway through, a familiar voice interrupted. "Ambitious for a planner, isn't it?" Elliot lounged in the back, his smirk cutting through the room. "Stick to table settings, Julian. Real estate's a different game." The room tittered, and Julian's pulse spiked. He'd prepared for this. "I've run the numbers, Elliot. The pinnacle's bleeding money under current management. I know how to make it thrive." Elliot's laugh was cold. "You? Buy the pinnacle? That's adorable." Julian held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "Watch me." The room buzzed, but Julian felt Ethan's presence in the crowd. His steady nod a reminder to keep going. He finished the pitch and two more investors, Lila Chen, 35, a restaurateur, and Marcus Reed, 50, a retired tech exec, signed on, intrigued by his fire. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. Back at his apartment, Julian paced, adrenaline still coursing through him. Ethan sat on the couch, editing photos from a recent shoot, his calm a stark contrast to Julian's storm. "He's trying to sabotage me," Julian said, rubbing his temples. "Elliot's got the money and the connections to make this impossible." Ethan set his laptop aside, pulling Julian down beside him. "He's scared. You're threatening his little kingdom. That's why he's lashing out." Julian exhaled, leaning into Ethan's warmth. "I don't know if I can do this. What if I'm not enough?" "You're more than enough," Ethan said fiercely, his hands framing Julian's face. "You're the guy who built a business from nothing, who makes people's dreams real. Elliot's got nothing on you." Their kiss was urgent, a release of the tension that had been building for weeks. Julian let himself get lost in it, in Ethan, in the belief that maybe, just maybe, he could pull this off. The next hurdle came fast. The Pinnacle's owners, a group led by a hard-nosed developer named Victor Hayes, 60, agreed to meet. Julian and Ethan spent days preparing, refining the pitch with Priya's input. The meeting was in a sterile boardroom, Victor's team staring Julian down like he was an interloper. "Your numbers are solid," Victor admitted, his voice gruff. "But you're young, inexperienced. Why should we trust you with a multi-million-dollar property?" Julian leaned forward, his voice steady. "Because I know the Pinnacle better than anyone. I've planned events there for years, weddings, galas, you name it. I've seen its flaws and its potential. I'm not here to flip it for a quick buck. I'm here to make it a landmark." Victor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't dismiss him. "We'll consider it, but you're not the only bidder." Julian's heart sank. He knew who the other bidder was before Victor said it. Elliot Marshall's group made an offer yesterday. Higher than yours. Of course. Elliot wasn't just mocking him now, he was playing to win. Julian left the meeting with a tight smile, but inside, he was reeling. Ethan was waiting outside, his camera slung over his shoulder. "They're entertaining Elliot's bid," Julian said, his voice flat. "He's trying to bury me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we fight dirtier. You've got something he doesn't, heart. We'll find a way." That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at a photo Ethan had taken of them at the cafe, their smiles unguarded. It was a reminder of what he was fighting for, not just the pinnacle but a life where he could be himself unapologetically. He started digging, researching Elliot's investors, looking for cracks. One name stood out: Naomi Klein, 45, a philanthropist who'd funded some of Julian's past events. She valued authenticity, community, everything Elliot wasn't. Julian reached out, securing a meeting. Naomi listened as he poured his heart into his vision, emphasizing how the pinnacle could be a space for marginalized voices, for art, for love in all its forms. She didn't commit, but her eyes lit up in a way that gave him hope. Ethan, meanwhile, was working his own angle, using his network to spread word of Julian's plan. Social media buzzed with posts about Carter events, about the guy who was taking on the elite to create something real. The momentum was small but growing, and Julian felt it. A shift, a chance. By the end of the month, Victor's team called. They wanted a final pitch. Julian had one shot to outshine Elliot, and the clock was ticking. The final pitch was set for a crisp November morning at the pinnacle itself. Julian arrived early, his nerves electric, Ethan at his side. The rooftop was bare, its usual glamour stripped away without Julian's touch. No fairy lights, no flowers, just cold steel and glass. It felt like a challenge, a blank canvas daring him to prove his worth. Inside the boardroom, Victor and his team sat stone-faced, Elliot already there, oozing confidence. His pitch came first, all slick graphics and promises of profit. He spoke of luxury, exclusivity, a playground for the rich. The board nodded, impressed, and Julian's stomach twisted. He was up against a machine. When it was his turn, Julian didn't rely on polished slides. He stood, his voice raw, and told a story. 3 years ago, I planned an event here for a couple who couldn't afford it. They were 2 women in love, shunned by their families. I made their wedding happen, every detail, every moment, because love deserves a stage, not a shadow. That's what the pinnacle could be. A place for everyone, not just the elite. A place where stories are born, not bought. He shared his plan. Affordable rentals for local artists, partnerships with nonprofits, spaces for queer youth to create. Ethan's visuals played behind him, vivid images of a reimagined pinnacle, alive with color and community. The room was silent when he finished, Victor's expression unreadable. Elliot leaned back, smirking, sweet but naive. This is business, not a charity case. Julian met his eyes. It's both. You'd know that if you cared about anything beyond your ego. The room tensed, but Victor raised a hand. We'll deliberate. You'll hear from us. The wait was torture. Julian and Ethan spent it at Ethan's loft in Ballard, a cozy space filled with photos and half-finished canvases. They cooked dinner, laughed, kissed, but the uncertainty hung heavy. Ethan tried to keep things light, showing Julian a photo he'd taken at the pinnacle that first night. Their moment by the signpost, Julian's face lit with hope. You're gonna win this, Ethan said, his voice firm. Not because of money, but because you're real. Julian wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed. What if Elliot's money spoke louder? What if all this was for nothing? The call came at dawn. Victor's voice was curt. "We're going with you, Carter. Your vision's risky, but it's got soul. We'll negotiate terms tomorrow." Julian froze, the phone trembling in his hand. Ethan whooped, pulling him into a hug that felt like victory. They'd done it. The pinnacle was his. The news spread fast, and so did the backlash. Elliot's crowd didn't take kindly to being outdone by the gay planner. Social media lit up with snide comments, and a few of Julian's clients pulled their contracts, citing concerns. But for every loss, there was a gain: new clients, small businesses, queer organizations reaching out, excited for what the pinnacle could become. Julian and Ethan threw themselves into the work, meeting with architects, community leaders, and artists to bring the vision to life. The pinnacle's renovation began, its cold exterior softened with greenery, its spaces redesigned for accessibility. Julian hired a diverse team, including Aisha Khan, 30, a brilliant designer who'd faced her own battles in the industry. One night, as they reviewed plans on the rooftop, Ethan pulled Julian close, the city sparkling below. "You did this," he whispered. "You changed the game." Julian shook his head. "We did. I couldn't have done it without you." Their kiss was a celebration, a defiance of every voice that had tried to silence them. The pinnacle wasn't just a venue anymore. It was a symbol of what was possible when you refused to stay small. But Elliot wasn't done. A week before the grand reopening, Julian got a call from a reporter at a local outlet. "Care to comment on allegations that your funding for the pinnacle came from unethical sources?" Julian's blood ran cold. It was a lie, a smear, but the timing was no accident. Elliot's name wasn't mentioned, but his fingerprints were all over it. The story gained traction, threatening to derail everything Julian had built. He called a meeting with his team, his voice steady despite the panic. "We're not backing down. We'll prove every dollar was clean, and we'll open the pinnacle on time." Ethan, ever the strategist, suggested a countermove: transparency. They released their financial records, invited the community to tour the venue, and leaned into the narrative of resilience. The backlash began to shift, with local voices rallying behind Julian, calling out the smear for what it was. The night before the reopening, Julian stood alone on the rooftop, the city's lights a reminder of how far he'd come. Ethan found him there, slipping an arm around his waist. "Ready for tomorrow?" Julian nodded, his heart full. "Ready to show them who we are." The grand reopening of the pinnacle was a love letter to Seattle. The rooftop glowed with fairy lights and vibrant murals, each corner alive with art from local creators. A stage hosted queer poets and musicians, while tables overflowed with food from minority-owned businesses. The crowd was diverse: artists, activists, families, couples of all kinds, united by a shared sense of belonging. Julian stood at the center, his navy blazer swapped for a simple sweater, his curly hair catching the evening breeze. Ethan was by his side, camera in hand, capturing every moment. The wooden signpost from that first night stood proudly, its carved words, "Love rewrites every story," now a beacon for the venue's mission. The smear campaign had fizzled, thanks to Julian's transparency and the community's support. Elliot's absence was conspicuous, his silence louder than any taunt. Julian didn't care. This wasn't about him anymore. He took the stage, his voice steady but thick with emotion. 3 years ago, I was just the guy who hung the lights. Tonight, I'm standing in a place we built together. A place for every story, every voice, every love. Thank you for believing in me. The crowd erupted, and Ethan's grin was brighter than the city skyline. Julian stepped down, pulling him into a kiss that drew cheers. It wasn't just a moment, it was a declaration. They weren't just the gay planner and the photographer. They were unstoppable. The night stretched on, alive with music and laughter. Julian mingled, shaking hands with investors like Priya, Lila, and Marcus, who beamed with pride. Aisha, now his right-hand woman, coordinated the event with flawless precision, her designs transforming the space into a living canvas. A young couple, two men in their early 20s, approached Julian, their eyes wide. "We're getting married next year," one said, his voice shy. "Can we book the Pinnacle?" Julian's heart swelled. "It's yours. Let's make it unforgettable." As they walked away, Ethan slipped his hand into Julian's. "You're changing lives, you know that?" Julian squeezed his hand. "So are you." Months later, the Pinnacle was thriving, booked solid with events that celebrated Seattle's diversity. Julian and Ethan moved in together, their apartment a blend of his organized chaos and Ethan's creative sprawl. Carter events grew, too, with Aisha taking on more leadership, freeing Julian to dream bigger. One evening, as they sat on their balcony overlooking the city, Ethan handed Julian a small box. Inside was a simple silver ring, etched with tiny stars. "I'm not asking yet," Ethan said, his voice soft. "But I'm promising. You and me, we're rewriting the story every day." Julian's eyes stung, but he laughed, pulling Ethan close. "Deal." The city stretched before them, a canvas of light and possibility. Julian wasn't just the gay planner anymore. He was a visionary, a partner, a man who'd turned mockery into triumph. And with Ethan by his side, he knew the best chapters were still to come.